Okay, let's go.
Hey guys, Ron from FunctionBuilt-Aquatics. So I wanted to do this video on a very, very important piece of equipment that I use on my Rio Jingu setup. This tank contains over 17 plecos that produce an immense amount of waste, get fed multiple times a day, but yet I'm still able to run this 75-gallon system. Yes, 75-gallon system with just a 50% water change once a week and run 0 nitrates altogether. The current filtration system is a Fluval FX6, basically set up as more mechanical filtration. I have some sponge filters inside the system to pre-filter the water going through the water pumps to help me produce the 7,000 gallons per hour flowing through this system. That's a lot of water in a 4-foot tank. I use the Venturi valves to help super oxygenate the water, but this video is going to be on the sulfur nitrate reactor. The sulfur nitrate reactor produces 0 nitrates. This filter has been running for over 2 years, so it's well mature. And the sulfur media is the yellow compound you see right there. That actually harbors the beneficial bacteria in an oxygen poor tube to lower and consume nitrates, basically producing nitrates 0. So I'll show a video with the water coming out of the effluent side, which is the discharge side of the reactor, and that the water coming out of the reactor is 0 parts per million. The last time I did a water change on this tank was last Sunday, and today is Friday. So the reactor itself is fed from the main aquarium with the Sichet water pump that has a little sponge pre-filter to keep anything from getting sucked up into the pump, any baby plecos, any contaminants that I do not want in the reactor. Remember, the reactor is supposed to be oxygen poor, and only water should go through the reactor. So we pre-filter the water going into the water pump. I use those valves to adjust the reactor, but currently they're wide open, and I have a discharge side. Basically, I'm running both valves, one going to the reactor and one to release some of the head pressure right here, running back to the aquarium. This way I'm not burning out the Sichet with the pressure, the pressure on it, the amount of head pressure on the water pump would eventually in time burn it up. So we're feeding the reactor from the main system. The water then goes through a pre-filter that I used out of a RO DI type cartridge, and in that I'm using filter floss, and I'm running the water through there first, and then it goes up into this sort of bubble type counter. But in here I'm just adding some more material just to also add some extra bacteria, but none of this stuff is really important. It's just, I just want to utilize as much space as I can. So once the water goes through the pre-filter, it goes through this tube, and then it goes into the reactor. So when it goes into the reactor, it goes in through the bottom first, allowing the water from the aquarium to slowly make its way through the sulfur media, the yellow media, that's separated with calcium carbonate material to help buffer the water coming out of the reactor. When you have such a nutrient and oxygen poor environment, your pH will naturally go more acidic. So we go with a little bit of the calcium carbonate material to buffer the water back to neutral, or as close to neutral as we can. So the water goes through the reactor, and I maybe missed this one important part, is this water pump right here is actually pumping the water through the reactor. So the water is getting fed into the reactor through that tube, and this water pump right here is circulating the water through the reactor to make sure that it goes through the material. Then the reactor discharges the water. Boom. So now we have a steady flow on the left side. That's coming out of the reactor. The slow drip is just the bypass to release some of the head pressure off the pump. that steady flow is coming out of the reactor at 0 parts per million. The water in my main system, after about 2 years' time, is reading 0 parts per million nitrates. Nitrates are the major component to keeping them at 0 and having success with plecos and fish in general. Nitrate sulfur reactors are very popular with saltwater aquariums. I'm not going to say I'm the only person using it on a freshwater system, but there aren't many people utilizing it on a freshwater system, and they're really overlooking a very important piece of equipment to help you in situations where you have quite a few setups tied together in one sump. You can use a reactor like this to basically filter and go through about 800 to 1,000 gallons. This system will probably do about 800-gallon aquarium, and I'm currently running it on a 75-gallon tank. But it did take some time to mature. It took about 2 years for it to be tuned and run correctly, and at this point, it's basically doing its job. The media doesn't have to be replaced for years and years and years down the road. The calcium carbonate material probably would dissolve super slowly, so that'll be good to go. So I would say that the reactor can just be left alone for quite some time. Now, I do keep the reactor covered because I do think that it's probably more of a benefit for no natural light to actually hit the reactor, and this is what I use this for right here. So the reactor, for the most part, every day is covered just like that. So this way, the beneficial bacteria are in their oxygen poor, nutrient poor, dark environment to help them actually develop, constantly reproduce, and break down the nitrates in the system. And that's basically how I get 0 nitrates in a heavily stocked 75-gallon tank with plecos. What plecos are in the system? Zebra plecos, golden nugget plecos, Medusa plecos, pretty much it. 3 very major components to the Rio Xingu setup: the plecos themselves. And this is Ron from FunctionBuilt-Aquatics, guys. If you have any questions, just please put something in the comments, like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more. See you. Okay guys, so let's test the water coming out of the reactor. So what we're going to do is we're going to test the water coming out of the effluent side, which would be the discharge side. And we're going to take the water coming directly out. So this will be the water that we're going to test. It's a brand new test tube, so I really don't have to worry about it. So what I do is I typically tuck this pipe, this discharge hose from the reactor back into the back plastic trim. This way it's locked in place. So now that we have the water coming out of the effluent side, we'll do the standard API test. I'll save you the boredom of this entire deal. We'll come back in about 15 minutes, 10-15 minutes or so, and we'll see the water coming out of the reactor. It should be reading 0 coming out of the reactor. So we'll be right back in about a few minutes or so. Okay guys, after I added all the 10 different drops for the API test kit, we're going to look at the water coming out of the effluent side of the reactor, and as you can see, 0. So we're going to discuss more in detail how we get to 0 parts per million nitrate in a heavily stocked aquarium with just 1 water change a week. And we're talking, the last time I did a water change was last Sunday. Today is Friday. So these fish get fed an awful lot. They get fed zucchini, sweet potato, a lot of different pellet foods with soft sponge. So there's a lot of food that goes into this aquarium. But how do we get to 0 parts per million nitrate? The reactor is the major part of it. and we're going to discuss those details next.